Welcome back, everyone. Man, it's just every time, Arlene, you lead us in worship, you are phenomenal. So thank you for that. Glad to be back here with you guys. Like we said before, that time we just had there, we're going to do things a little bit different. This is usually when we kind of play the message, the pre-recorded message, but today we're just going to do everything live. So it's good to see some of you guys in chat. And we're going to kind of reference to the chat. So feel free to comment, add your thoughts, answer some questions there. That'll kind of help us be able to talk and engage with you as well, even though we're not kind of physically with you guys. But like I said, we're kicking off a new series called Bless This Mess, because I think when I think of relationships, one thing I think of is how messy it can be.
Yeah.
I think not just in friendships, but even family relationships can be messy, and marriage relationships, romantic relationships, relationships with kids and siblings. It can all be really messy. And I know personally, I am a hot mess many times.
No.
We can be easy. Listen, maybe we don't need to have her on camera here. I don't know how well this is going to be. But anyway, whatever relationships you have in your life, in this series, our goal is, though there will be times that we talk about specific relationships, I hope all of it can remain kind of helpful in this series, that you can kind of get something out of it, kind of no matter what direction we're going. And today we want to talk about kind of the foundation of a lot of those relationships. We want to kind of talk about those because I think there's some relationships that we have that are your acquaintances, maybe you work together, your neighbors, your kind of friends, and then there's like the close relationships, the people that are really close to you, and that's what we really want to focus on. And so in first service we were talking about this, and I was thinking about some of our closest friends, some of our closest relationships, and kind of what makes those unique. So I'm curious your thoughts as well. What is it about your closest relationships that makes those different? Maybe why are those people people that kind of became your people? You know, the people that you let in. So Kel, for you, what does it take for you to really let someone in? I know you're super good at that. So what does it take for you to kind of let someone in at that level? Because I'd still like to know. After all these, I'm just kidding.
Stop it. No, I am more guarded, and you'll have to excuse. Do you want to just go shut that door really quick?
Yeah,
our kids are fighting downstairs, so we're just gonna close the bedroom door so you can't hear them as well. I think for me, I am a little bit more guarded. It's just is what it is. That's me. I think some of that comes from, I think a lot of us can be afraid to show who we really are sometimes because we're not sure how that's going to be received from other people. We don't know. It's like, well, if that person really knew me or knows this about me, am I going to lose my belonging with them? Are they still going to see me the same way? And so I do tend to be a little bit more guarded. I've had times where I have sort of opened up to people and let them see parts of me, and it sort of backfired. And so that causes me, I think, to sometimes then retreat a little bit more. But I think given all of that, for me, the thing that I think really solidifies a solid friendship is when someone allows me to be fully who I am, doesn't try to change me or fix me, or I'm not too much for them. They're not bothered by us disagreeing. They're not even on big things, that's huge for me. And then that's something that I think I want to be that for other people too, to be that place where people can be exactly who they are, and I'm not trying to change them or turn them into someone that they're not, but just I love, and not just like, oh, I'll love you anyway, or I'll but that whole like, no, I fully accept and embrace all of who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, instead of trying to make people be something that they're not.
Yeah.
So, and that doesn't mean, from first service, I remember there was a comment about this that absolutely doesn't mean that there isn't room for, like, I still want my friends to be able to look at me and say, hey, this thing that you said or did, that was hurtful to me. Or the kind of the way you're coming across right now could be hurtful to someone else. Like, I think it's important to be able to still kind of call you on your crap a little bit, just to make sure that the way that we're behaving isn't causing harm, but that ultimately who we are in our process and how we're growing and changing and evolving, that we're allowed to do that in a safe space.
Yeah. Mark and Jenny were saying they can also relate to that kind of backfire idea where you let someone in and then realize, oh man, now I'm paying these prices for this. Dino talked about trust and loyalty and vulnerability. We were, what you mentioned just a second ago, we both listened to a podcast this week that talked about that idea of, like, you want people that love you, period. Not even that, like, well, I love you in spite of this, or I love you anyway.
Nobody wants that to be said to you.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Oh, well, there's this part of you that I don't really like, but I still love you.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah. No, you want, yes, yeah. Those closest relationships are the people that love you, full stop.
Yes.
I mentioned this in first service, but a friend of mine, this past year and a half plus have been very challenging. And in one of these challenging seasons, he came to me.
Like the kind of season that I would just like to put in a little box and lock it up and bury it.
Yes.
And be like,
and just be done with it.
we just be done.
And in this time, one of my friends came to me and said, listen, I know you've got a lot of people. He might even be, he was here first service. I don't know if he's here this service, but also one of your board members said, listen, I know you've got a lot of friends who, will do everything short of sin, for you. He's like, I want you to know I'm okay asking for forgiveness. He's like,
sin's not off the table.
Listen, I'll cut somebody if you need me to. Like, and we need those kinds of friends.
You do. The ones that are like, I will
ride or die.
Who died, and where are we going to bury the body, and how can I protect you from getting caught? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, of course, we say this a little bit in jest. We want people that aren't going to create harm or allow you to create harm and all of those things, but the people that just love you, full stop.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't mean that there's an absence of conflict. But when we think about what you need for that, I think Dino nailed it, that trust and the loyalty and vulnerability.
Which are such beautiful sounding words to say.
Yeah.
But really hard.
Yeah.
To live.
Amanda said that. She said, I've had a lot to work through, a lot of therapy she's gone through to help being vulnerable. So when I take that risk, it backfires. That makes it even harder. Absolutely. Yeah. Unconditional love, non-judgmental acceptance. Yeah, 100%. And, as I was thinking about that this week, and I was kind of preparing this, and I was thinking about kind of what are the foundations of relationships that create blessing even when it can be messy, even when it's challenging, even when it's hard, even when it backfires. What are those foundations that kind of, again, to use kind of a churchy word, that bring blessing, that bring something that revives your spirit, revives your kind of soul, who you are? And I was reminded of a letter in the early church as they were kind of going through this. And this guy named Paul, he wrote many of the letters that make up the New Testament. And what I love about the New Testament is that I think we miss sometimes as Christians in the church, especially if you've been in the church for any amount of time, is you think of the Bible as like this like magical thing.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's like letters and stuff by real people.
Actual human beings.
Written to other actual human beings.
There was nothing special or more holy about Paul than there is about any of us. Like,
and they're right, and they're going through real life things, and they don't try to hide that. And in one of these letters, it's the letter to the church in Galatia. Historians, theologians believe there was likely probably several churches in this one area, and they were going through a lot of strife internally when Christianity, if you will, kind of started, when people started following Jesus, when they called it the way, before it even had a name. It was primarily these Jewish followers of God that believed that Jesus was their Messiah. So it was entirely Jewish. And that was fine for a while, but then people started following Jesus that weren't Jewish, and there became these kind of like the in and the out, the Gentiles and the Jews. And in many of these churches, conflict arose because there was requirements that the Jewish people had to follow God. You would have to do things that the Gentiles didn't want to do. And they started discussing, what do we do with these people who want to follow Jesus? Do they have to, I mean, for them, their Bible said you have to do X, Y, and Z. And they talked about the law of Moses, kind of capital L, this law that God had given. And, but what started happening is these leaders in the church started seeing the Holy Spirit move in their lives. And they started wrestling with, what do we do when our law says one thing, but what we see the Holy Spirit doing in these people's lives, they're not following this. Yeah. And there was this conflict that arose about that. And this is what Paul's letter is kind of about, is kind of addressing this kind of division. And he talks about the church, and he talks about what we are to do if we are to follow Jesus. And I want to read a couple of these verses because I think it's important as we think about relationships. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. This is Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 through 3. It says, stoop down and reach out to those who are oppressed. Share their burdens and so complete Christ's law. If you think you're too good for that, you're badly deceived. And I want to bring out a couple of distinctions. One, him talking about Christ's law. This is something that Paul would do a lot in his letters. He would kind of contrast the law, capital L, of Moses with Christ's law. And what he's referring to in Christ's law is when Jesus says, a new command I give you, to love one another as I have loved you. And as you do this, you'll know that they're my disciples. And so Paul is saying this is the thing that's most important. That's what Jesus was saying. This is the thing that matters. As you fulfill this, you're going to fulfill everything else. This is what matters most. And Paul references that. He says, this is how you complete Christ's law, is you reach out to the oppressed and you share one another's burdens. And as a little bit of an aside, I want to encourage, this is why at Icon we talk about the oppressed so much. We talk about marginalized people so much, is because Paul did and Jesus did. Like, this is kind of the point of it, is how we live our lives here on earth now. It's the past 2 weeks in the message we shared, talking about the God we serve is the God that hears the cry of the oppressed. That we need to orient our lives around that. But Paul says that as we share one another's burdens, as we carry that weight for one another, that's how we fulfill Christ's law. And I think for me, as we talked about all these things, trust and vulnerability and non-judgmental, unconditional love, acceptance, it's that carrying of those burdens. And I can say for me, the times I've felt most loved is when people kind of carry that weight for me. You know, that people, not trying to necessarily fix it, but just people that just can sit in that with me and just say, that sucks. That I'm so sorry, and can kind of bear that weight.
And I'm here, you know, just like sometimes that's all you have to say is just let people know you are there. You know, I think, because when I think about times when things feel heavy or hard, I know that there's anything that anybody can do to fix it or make it go away or make it better. You know, like we all know that when we're in the throes of a really difficult time in our life. So that's not even what anyone is ever looking for, is for someone to step in and just fix all of it and make it all go away. Like, we just want people who are going to be there, you know, and help hold the weight of that when it feels too heavy, you know, for us to carry on our own. Yeah, I remember I was in high school. I was either junior or senior, and one of my friends, who was also a mentor of mine, he was a pastor on staff, and he was probably 10 years older than me. So, you know, here I am, this high school student. He's this adult, kind of this mentor of mine, and he and his wife had a miscarriage. It was Matt and Diva, and he was pastor on staff, and you know, everyone was doing all these things, and I called him, and as a high school, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what, and I just said, this was obviously before text, and I just told him, I was like, man, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. I just want you to know I'm here. And later he told me, he said, of all the people that called, that did, everyone was trying to fix it. Everyone was trying to offer this
the stupid people who try, like, God is a plan. God just wanted that little
like,
baby
I'll tell
with
you where God can take the plan.
Yeah.
You know?
And he said all these people were trying to do all these things to handle him,
Yeah.
to fix it. And he said, you, this high schooler, was this one person that just said, I'm sorry, that's awful, I'm here. And he's like,
Yeah.
that's all I wanted. And I think so many times, Mark calls it drive-by versing. That's awesome, Jenny. That's so good. I'm going to use that.
That is 100% what that is.
100%. They don't really care about you. It's just like, here, they just want to throw that at you. But yeah, just that being there. And I think that's what it means to bear one another's burdens,
Yeah.
to share their burdens. And I like that verse said, not to like take them away, not to like fix them, not to transform them into not burdens, but just to carry that weight.
And
to
Smitty
hold that
just
space.
asked, he said, why do you think our first reaction is to try and fix it? I think it's because, at least this is what I've learned, and I can tell like when my tendency to try to help someone fix it, it's because we oftentimes aren't good at sitting in pain. Like we want to numb it, fix it, make it go away. Like we're just not, I don't know if it's a westernized culture thing, if it's an American culture thing, or even if it's just, sometimes I think more of a church culture thing, because we feel like if we're Christians, that means we're supposed to always be full of hope and joy and love and everything's great and we're victorious, and we're not good at lament and suffering. We're not good at that. And so I think I know what I have found is a lot of times we try to fix it because we feel like that's what we're supposed to do. Because if there's pain and suffering, we don't know how to allow that, how suffering and the presence of God can coexist. We kind of feel like those two things can't exist together, and that's just simply not true. And I think it's always with the best of intentions. It's like we don't want to see people we love hurting, so we want to try to come in and do what we can to fix it and make it better, because we don't want people to be in pain. But I mean, if we think back to our own lives, anytime I have ever been in pain, I've never wanted someone to come in and try to fix it, you know. But I think that's just our natural response, you know.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a great question, you know, and I think I think you're spot on. We are uncomfortable in pain, you know, and we want that to go away as quickly as possible. And you're right. Sometimes we numb it. We, you know, do whatever we can to try to distract ourselves from it. I think for me, one way I try to unhealthily cope with pain is just ignore it, you know. To distract myself, to, you know, go, suck it up, you know, whatever that is. And I think we all have these kind of coping mechanisms that we try, but yeah, we don't like to sit in that pain. And I think
it does come from, I think it also comes from sometimes our theology around suffering and around God can be a bit off, you know, where we automatically equate suffering and pain with a lack of God's presence. You know, and in fact, if you look throughout stories in Scripture, and if we look at our own lives, usually God is ever present in the middle of suffering. You know, but it's just it's hard because it also feels uncomfortable and feels bad, and we don't want to feel bad. You know, so
And I think the challenge that Paul was giving is in telling this church in the midst of the mess, what it looks like to be faithful to this law of Christ. You know, Sam put it here in the verse, and a letter that Peter wrote, you know, love conquers multiple, be hospitable to one another without grumbling, you know, having fervent love for one another. And he's saying how you do this, one way you do this is you bear one another's burdens. He says in verses 9 and 10, I'm going to put this up. It says, so let us not allow ourselves to get fatigued in doing good. At the right time, you'll harvest a good crop if we don't give up or quit. Right now, therefore, every time we get the chance, let us work for the benefit of all, starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith. This verse kind of stood out to me for a few reasons, and I'm going to get a little bit of a tangent here because I just couldn't kind of skip by this moment. I think this is good encouragement in general, like apart from just relationships in general. so many of us have been speaking out against injustice and trying to learn to be able to speak up for racial injustice and all of these things, and it can be wearisome, it can be tiresome, and it's our privilege that we can quit if we want to.
Oh my goodness, yes, that's a whole nother conversation.
But I think it's good to be encouraged to not give up, to continue to speak. And as I was preparing this verse just really, we're going to come back to this in the fall. But I think how we orient our shared lives together, politics, if you will, what politics is how we orient society, how we live within that. And this idea of let us work for the benefit of all. If we allow that ethic to shape our lives and to shape our politics, what does the most good for the most people? I'm not talking, how you answer that could vary. You could answer that with different political answers. But if you were focused on what does the most good for the most people, which then requires you to talk to lots of people, to listen to lots of people,
particularly marginalized people
different than you, and listen to that and say, what does the most good for these people? If we could let that inform our shared life together, I think that could change our community, our world. I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing in society right now are people thinking about what does the most good for me.
Me and mine. It's that individualism. I said to Dan in between services, I was like, I feel like individualism is one of America's greatest sins. Where it's like we just focus so much on what's best for ourselves, or even just what's best for the people we love the most, rather than what is best does the most good for the most people.
You read I think so you got it up, this Brenda Salter McNeil quote.
Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil, she posted this on Instagram the other day, and I just thought it was so appropriate for now. It says, our theology informs our anthropology, which in turn informs our sociology. That is to say, what we believe about God will tell us what we believe about people. And what we believe about people will tell us what kinds of communities and societies we believe we should strive to create. I was like, gosh, like when people will say, I just don't care about politics, I don't care, and try to want to do the la la la, it's like that's such a privileged position to even hold, to say you don't care. And for us to understand that what we believe about God as people who follow Jesus, like as people of faith, what we believe about God should in turn inform how we try to build, the way that we build community, within our close friends, within our churches, within our community at large. So I just thought that was really good.
And I think that goes hand in hand with what we're talking about, not just, yes, this has been a little bit of an aside, but when we have a society that can bear one another's burdens, that doesn't weary in that is okay to sit in pain and to listen to people's lament and to listen and not immediately try to fix it, to understand it first. This is what Paul's getting at. He's saying there's division in your community. Listen, don't get weary. This is going to be tiresome. This is going to be challenging. Sit in that, bear one another's burdens. And it should start in the church. It should start with us. And this is why we're talking about this, is we need to have a community here that when we're not okay, that we can share that we can pray for one another, that we can just listen sometimes and say that sucks and not do some drive-by versing and just go, I'm so sorry.
Sabrina said, yes, bad theology tells us that pain is a burden for us to bear. It's, if someone is in pain in our community, it's like that suddenly is not just their pain, it's our pain. And that's the kind of communal aspect of faith, is to go when one person is, it's the whole like Audre Lorde when she's like, we're not all free, until we are all, no one's free until everyone's free. That actually might not be Audre Lorde. I think that's actually
Martin Luther King Jr.
There's another. It was a woman that first said it. But I can't remember her name.
Okay.
Anyways, that whole idea that You know, if one of us is in pain, then that's all of our pain to bear.
Yeah.
You know, it's never just one person on their own. No one's an island.
Yeah.
But sometimes we try to be.
Yeah. And on that, and for me, I can say, I'm curious what you guys think. For me, one of the hardest things is not bearing other people's burdens. I feel like I can do that. I have reminded myself enough. Sometimes I fail and I want to fix it. I want to, but I can lean in and say, I can sit in this pain. I can bear this burden with you. I think the hardest thing for me is allowing other people to carry my weight. Yeah. It's this hypocritical, it's this weird, even as I was preparing this, I was like, man, I don't want to talk about this because I don't want to have to admit this. But for me, the hardest thing is just being honest and letting other people carry my weight. I think this church culture that I was raised in, being a pastor, doesn't help that at all.
Yeah.
Because I think, well, I'm the pastor, I got to have it all together, or I've got to...
and that gets its claws really deep in you, especially if you've been raised in the evangelical church for a long time. That really does sink its hooks into you. This whole idea of like, having the right behavior and appearing as if all is well and not needing other people to
honestly
be able to pull your own weight.
This week for me has been really hard. I mean, it was just a rough week this week. Even part of the reason why we're doing this live is because of that. I tried to prepare 5 different times and just struggled. And I was like, but that's hard for me. That's hard to kind of let people in and carry that weight. I'm curious how many of you shut it. I'm curious for you guys. Is that something that's hard for you to kind of let other people carry the weight for you, to let other people, you're fine bearing other people's weight. But when it's like, okay, but how are you doing? And you're like, oh, I'm fine. I'm good. No problem.
We saw an overwhelming number of people in first service that were engaged in the chat were all saying yes. Like, I love to come alongside other people and to sit with them in their pain, but when it comes time to allowing other people to do it for me, that's a whole nother story. And it was really interesting to me to see how many people struggle.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Why is it that for so many people, we're okay carrying other people's burdens, but we don't want other people to carry ours? Why do you think that is?
I mean...
Feel free to answer, too. I'm curious what you guys think.
I mean, I think it could be different for different people. I'm trying to think of myself. I think it's out of a fear of being too much for someone. I think for a long time it was like feeling like a good Christian is strong and a good Christian, has the answer. And again, you are hopeful and you're joyful and you're happy and you're blessed and all of those things, and so, but I think sometimes it's out of a fear of, am I going to come across as too much? Is that person going to then like see what's really going on and see the mess that really is inside of me, and is that going to then make them pull away? Is it going to be too much for them to handle? So I think it goes back to me out of a fear of losing belonging, because it's like, if I really because in order for someone to really carry your burden with you, they have to be able to see the burden, and you have to actually expose it and let them see what's really going on. And I think for me, I get afraid of losing belonging with people when they actually see what's going on.
Yeah. Dino said fear of rejection or judgment. Smitty was saying being seen as weak. I do think it's different for everyone. I remember when I came across the Enneagram years ago, and I read kind of knowing where I land as, for me, an Enneagram 7. If you're not familiar with the Enneagram, there's a million books on it. It's 2020. I'm sure you've probably heard someone talk about it in the past few years. But for me, I remember reading for each type, it talks about you want to avoid something. You want to, and for me, it was to avoid pain. That's my kind of core fears is avoiding pain. And at first, I it didn't make sense, but the more I read about it, it made so much sense. I think for me, one reason I don't want to let people bear that burden is because then I have to feel it. You know what I mean? Like,
then you first have to admit that it's actually there.
That it's there, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's so easy to like just go on to the next thing, and I want to have fun, and I'm ever the optimist. It's challenging for me to even remember painful things or to remember like forgiveness. Most of the time isn't that hard for me because it's easy to kind of sweep it under the rug and to forget about it again, so I don't have to deal with that pain. And I think for me, the reason I don't want to talk about it, I don't want someone to have to bear that burden, is I don't want to feel it.
Yeah.
I want to avoid it. So
that's real. That's
for
so real.
you know, for you, when you're saying I don't want to lose relationship. For me, it's more I just don't want to feel it in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's why it's really hard. Talk about relational vulnerability often requires risk. For me, the risk is worth the reward of connection.
But yeah, it is. It no matter how you look at it, it is risky.
Yeah.
I mean, there is always going to be risk involved, and sometimes, you'll risk it and you will get burned.
Yeah.
I mean, that will happen.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Like we were talking about it earlier. You know, that being burnt by it is hard, not just because of that pain, but then it reinforces, see, I am too much. See, I don't want to,
100%. Yeah. Oh, I recently had a situation with someone where I, kind of exposed and talked about something very personal, and that was later used against me. And so what that made me want to do then was it was almost like that, see, I can't, I just lost my belonging here. And so I'm right to be close-fisted with that because, and so it's just, so you have to then force yourself to push past that and remind yourself that not you, there was this quote I read where it's you will be too much for some people. Those aren't your people.
Yeah,
so it's if you expose your mess and you expose your burden to people and they decide that you're too much, at that point it hurts and it's painful, but at that point we can just say, you know what, they're just not my people. If they can't handle this burden, if they can't handle what's really going on inside of me, then they're just not my people, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means you realize, okay, that's just not someone that I can do that with.
Yeah. And I think for us, what we want to create here at Icon, it's what Paul talked about at the end, starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith, is we want Icon to be a community where that can happen. Someone said distrust of others. Can they really bear our mess? Man, I would want nothing more than Icon to be a place where you can come in. They may not be your closest friend, but I'm not too much for this person. You know what I mean? That it's okay to not be okay. That I can.
Sam just said, if someone asked, how are you, are we prepared to get a true answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so good.
Yep. And be people that are okay going, yeah, I'm not doing great. Not okay right now.
Yep.
I know for me, what I have to do is I have to kind of trick myself into it. I have to like today, I have a conversation with two friends, and then tomorrow I'm having a conversation with our boards. Because there's some ways that I'm just really struggling right now. So I had to text people and say, hey, we need to talk, and just hit send before I can even think about it. Because then I'm forced in, and someone's what do you want to talk about? Nothing.
I'm not okay, and I really need you to bear my burdens. Before you even think, just send it.
Yes. Yeah.
Guess it.
But I want us to be a place where we can do that you can trust, hey, this is a safe place to be myself. I love the journey our church has been on from the beginning. I feel like I remember there was times sitting down with our launch team, and we were it was this kind of ragtag group of people. I could go back and look at photos, and I love that all of us were just we may not have all these things that we can bring to the table, but we can just bring ourselves.
Yeah.
And I hope that remains true of us, that we can forever be a community where we can just bring ourselves raw, and we can bear one another's burdens.
And I'll tell you what, like this whole season of, strictly online church
good luck.
has been, what did Buck say?
He was just saying, putting yourself in a vulnerable position by nature is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable just
100%.
to put yourself out there is
100%.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually what Sam just said. I was
Yeah.
going to talk about that. Sometimes it's just listening and a hug that we need, not preaching.
Yeah.
And even along that, like this whole season of church online, I think what it's done for me, it has made me miss gathering for sure. I mean, I miss being corporately with everybody, but it has also stripped away all of the stuff that I think, even at Icon, I think we have almost felt obligated to provide certain services for people. Like we have felt obligated to provide this really excellent, good experience. And I'm not saying that that's bad to like provide a good experience for people, but at least for me anyway, I mean, I don't know what other people are thinking, but just getting really real here. For me, it's like caused all of that stuff to just become so much less, it just doesn't matter anymore. Like to me, it's, the point of church is not to have this well-produced service or it's this, it's like being able to come together and bear one another's burdens and fight injustice together, and it's really, I just feel like this whole season has made me realize if the kind of church I want to be a part of is the kind of church that does what we're talking about today. That we are real and we are vulnerable and we love each other and we bear one another's burdens, and all the other stuff just doesn't matter. Just doesn't.
I was talking to a friend of mine who planted a church and now is no longer pastoring, and he was saying for him, it's like if you can create, there's so much that doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
So
that we
much.
spend so much energy and time
And money on.
like what would it look like to have community where this was really at its core? And I do think this global pandemic has kind of forced us to remember some of those things. That there's so much that doesn't matter. Let's focus on what really does matter right now. And I'm grateful that there's a bunch of you out there that are willing to lean into that, and are willing to do that for one another.
Said being the church.
Yeah,
and we
100%.
talk about that a lot, but I think it's still, it's we've said that from Icon's inception. Like we've talked about the importance of being the church, but I think honestly, there have been a lot of moments where
having church is more important.
Having church is more important than being the church, and especially like you get into a building and you have more expenses and you have all these things that happen that you just it just becomes this like machine that you're just kind of trying to crank out a product all the time. And I just think this season right now I feel like it's just brought me back to go, all of that stuff is so meaningless, and to me, it's just all that matters is people. That really is all that matters is people and our relationships with each other. It's just, that's it.
Yeah. So we love you guys. I know this was a little different, kind of doing it live. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed kind of seeing you guys on here. I hope you've enjoyed this. And as we lean into the series, kind of talk about some other aspects of relationships, I hope you're able to get something out of this. But today, if we could leave you with anything, it would just be an encouragement to lean in, that this is a community that we're here to be here for one another and to carry those burdens. So wherever you find yourself, we've got people in South Africa and around the world.
So crazy.
Find that community wherever you can, and we want to be that for you. So reach out to us. You can always email the church. You can always reach out. I think everyone on here would say the same thing, that we're here to carry one another's burdens for one another.
And as we're like closing it, I need to read. I mean, I'm sure I know everybody can see it, but what Sabrina and Locke just said was we need to also realize that we're denying people the opportunity to know and love the whole us when we try to keep things to ourselves. It's not a burden, but can be a gift to those who care about us. That's so profound and so true that we aren't able to bring our full self, and we're denying other people that when we try to not be fully who we are with one another. That's so good.
Yeah. So thank you guys. We love you guys. We hope you have a great week this week. Take care of yourselves. Be praying. I saw earlier on Sabrina and Locke mention
some friends and family that have COVID.
Yeah.
It's the worst. We're thinking of them all and praying for them all.
Yep. So we love you guys. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you back here next week. God bless.